Hey there, Speedy. Welcome to my channel where we help you understand landlord-tenant law. In today's video, I am representing a client. We are going to court because our HOA president thinks he owns our house. So if you like this kind of content, go ahead and subscribe down below so you get notified every time we put out new videos. Our HOA president thinks he owns my house. Now you might be saying, well, how does an HOA president think that he owns your house? Well, there's a few different ways. One is through nuisance complaints, another is through fines, and another one is what we call a mechanic's lien. But let me explain all those separately. So in California, we have something called the Davis-Sterling Act. That is the law that governs homeowner associations. And it says that a homeowner association cannot use nuisance complaints to harass a homeowner. They also cannot use fines to harass a homeowner. However, they can use fines and they can use nuisance complaints to enforce the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Each HOA has their own set of rules, their own covenants, conditions, and restrictions that are binding on every single owner. You agree to abide by them when you purchase the property, and typically they're recorded somewhere either with the county or in your grant deed. There's always some type of language in there that indicates you will abide by the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Also called CC and Rs. Each HOA has their own set of rules, right? Some are more strict than others. Some have more rules than others. And if you don't follow those rules, then the HOA can send you a violation letter, and sometimes that can lead to a fine. Now, when you become a homeowner, you get a copy of the CC&Rs, and you also should receive a copy of the bylaws. The bylaws dictates how the HOA operates. For instance, how do you call a meeting? How many people have to show up at the meeting? What is a quorum? All that good stuff is in the bylaws. Now, the CC&Rs are the actual rules. For instance, maybe you can't park your car on the street. Maybe you can't park an RV on the street. Maybe there's rules about what types of fences you can have. Maybe there's rules about how tall your grass can be. These are all typical covenants, conditions and restrictions that HOAs have. Now, typically, if you violate them, the HOA can send you a letter saying you violated them, and they can fine you. In addition to that, they can also file a lawsuit against you for violating those CC&Rs. Now, in addition to the fines, the HOA also has something called a lien. Now, that's a whole different animal. It's not really related to the violations, but it's something that comes up a lot with homeowners associations. When you purchase your property, there's a mechanic's lien that is attached to it, meaning that the HOA has a claim against your property for any unpaid dues, fines, special assessments. If you purchase your property and the seller did not pay his HOA dues, then that amount becomes a debt on the property itself. So if you purchase the property, now you're responsible for paying those HOA dues. This is why it's so important to do a title search before you buy a property. That way, you know if there's any liens on the property before you purchase it, because if there is, you can make the seller pay them off, or reduce the price of the property based on whatever HOA liens are attached to it. But either way, they are attached to the property itself. They're not attached to you personally. It's attached to the property. So if you purchase the property, now you're stuck with that lien. So again, that's why it's so important to do a title search before you buy any property. Now, once the HOA has assessed these fines or sent you violation letters, what can they do with that information? Well, in some cases, they can report you to the credit agencies. Then that gets reported on your credit report, and it affects your credit score. And that's something we see come up all the time. Or in other situations, they may go to court and try to get a judgment against you for the fines. But this is where things get really interesting, because in most cases, homeowners associations do not have standing to bring a lawsuit against you. Let me repeat that. In most cases, homeowners associations do not have standing to bring a lawsuit against you for violating the CC&Rs, Why? Because the violation letters are not a breach of contract, the fines are not a breach of contract, and a mechanic's lien is not a breach of contract. These are all separate actions. The breach of contract action would be if you didn't pay your HOA dues. That would be considered a breach of contract. But none of the other items I mentioned constitute a breach of contract, and therefore the HOA does not have standing to bring a lawsuit against you. Now, there are some exceptions to that rule, and you must read your CC&Rs very carefully to determine whether or not the HOA has the ability to sue you. For example, some HOAs have a self-help provision in their CC&Rs, meaning that if they assess you fines, they can go and get a contractor and they can fix the problem and they can add that cost to your assessment. You basically pay for the contractor to come in and fix whatever issue you had. Now, typically, this only applies to issues with your property. It doesn't apply to you personally. But again, read your CC&Rs carefully to find out whether or not your HOA has that type of provision in there. If it does, then they probably do have the ability to sue you. But if it doesn't, then they do not have the ability to sue you. Now, in our case, the HOA president went too far. Not only did he send us violation letters, he filed a lawsuit against us, but he also put a mechanic's lien on our property. The problem is, he signed the mechanic's lien as an individual. He did not sign it on behalf of the homeowners association. A mechanic's lien has to be signed on behalf of the association, and since he signed it as an individual, it is totally ineffective, and it is, in fact, defacing public records because it's recording something that is not true. He is not authorized to do that. Now, I know a lot of you guys are thinking, well, why don't you just take it to court? Taking it to court takes time and money. I work for a non-profit agency. We serve low-income clients, and we do not have the funds to take this guy to court for doing this. So what I'm trying to do is educate you guys so that you know about this, so it doesn't happen to you. Also, I'm going to give you a couple tips on what you can do if this happens to you. One of the things you can do if this happens to you is send him a cease and desist letter. A cease and desist letter is a letter that basically tells him to stop doing what he's doing, and if he doesn't stop, then you can sue him for what he did. Now, this is why it's important to keep everything in writing. His name is John Doe. I'm going to send him a cease and desist letter. I'll tell him to stop sending me violation letters, stop calling me, and leave me alone. And if you don't, I will sue you. Now, once I send him a cease and desist letter and he continues to contact me, then I have the ability to sue him for what he did. And that will also tie up his personal assets in this case. So if I sue him and I win, then I can go after his personal assets, such as his bank account, his retirement account, his vehicle, his paycheck, things of that nature. None of those things are protected by the HOA, because in order to protect those things, he needs to act on behalf of the HOA. He cannot act on his own personal behalf. The other thing you can do is check your title policy. Most title policies will cover this type of issue. So if someone goes and puts a lien on your property that is not true, then your title company should be able to remove that lien from your property. You should also check with your title company to find out whether or not they will pay your attorney's fees. In our situation, they won't pay our attorney's fees. We're going to court on this, but that's because our policy did not kick in. It didn't cover this issue. So it never hurts to ask your title company to find out whether or not they will cover this type of issue. And finally, talk to your mortgage company. Typically, your mortgage company will have an agreement with the HOA, and they will know who to contact. In some situations, the mortgage company will step in and handle the situation for you. So talk to your mortgage company and find out what your options are. I hope this was helpful. As always, I want to remind you to take care of yourself and take care of each other. See you next time.